In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast, brought to you by Funny Bone Broth, who are all sold out of everything they have right now across the GTA. So, the support that Funny Bone Broth has given us over the years has been terrific, and the support that you, in turn, the listener, have given Funny Bone Broth has been awesome, to the point where they are now sold out of everything. So they'll be back to the kitchen soon and able to provide you with some more Funny Bone Broth. I am Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. Man, we got a lot of stuff to talk about this week. We're going to try and condense some of the things that we've got on the docket. A lot of player moves, 4 players added, 4 players lost. We're going to talk a lot about the double blue game today because, you and I, JB, got to see all the action on Sunday night, and it was nice to see some football being played again, even though it was just an inter-squad scrimmage. I think that was really cool. We've got a little bit of a CBA update. We're not going to pound you over the head with CBA updates because there's so much of that out there. I'm tired of it myself, but we want to address a couple of things, and then we'll give you our plan for the preseason game in Ottawa this week. All that and more coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. A lot of signings this week, JB. It's pretty typical this time of year to have this many roster moves, and 4 guys coming in, 4 guys on their way out, sort of. Let's go through some of these guys. So the first one, the guy on their way in, it's a bit misleading, I guess, because he is a draft pick, but Dionte Knight signing, the day after I think we recorded last week. This was really good to see because to me, this means that their gamble paid off. Remember, he's a second-round pick. Dionte Knight, to me, was the second best player available in the draft. And most people saw it that same way too. But you and I both felt he slid down the board because there was a real chance he ended up in the States and nobody wanted to spend a first-round draft pick on a guy that wasn't even going to show up this year. The Argos take him. They couldn't resist right at the top of round 2. That pays off right away because here he is signing and he's in camp. That's huge for their draft class.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's great to see his desire to commit to a CFL career, and that's great talent that we added. And I think that's just really another proof of what a great draft it was.
And the guys that I talked to in Tampa Bay and Washington that cover those teams did say he looked fantastic in Washington. He wasn't really able to stand out too much in Tampa Bay, the way that they ran their rookie minicamp. But in Washington, he really impressed. He was just in a bad situation where they've got, they spent a second round pick on one of their own guys. They've got undrafted free agents they signed. They're just not going to take a guy that wasn't even signed to a UDFA contract, a Canadian as well. They just weren't going to take a chance on it. So it's sort of bad luck for him, but great news for the Argos in that sense, because he's up here at least for this season anyway, and he was contributing right away. He has the look out there. He's a much bigger individual than I imagined. I saw him play U Sports, obviously, but I was surprised at just how large he is when he's there next to guys like Hendricks and Champong and the rest of that D line, guys that are massive. He does not look at all out of place. So I'm excited to see him. We got to see him a little bit in camp, limited in the scrimmage, but he will be a contributor this year. So it was great to get him signed and out there on the field so we can get caught up.
Yeah, I don't want to be the wet blanket. I think I agree. He actually does look quite big. I mean, it's still kind of a tweener vibe, because he's not quite big enough for the, to play tackle. Is he a little too big to be on the outside? So that, I'm hoping to see what he can do.
I'm excited about a player like that. I agree with you, but I think that's less a CFL problem and more an NFL problem. Guys get shut out of the league when they're tweeners like that. You do see guys succeed in the CFL that are sort of tweeners because you can count so heavily on most of the plays being passes. And so when you don't have to worry about run defense, like you can see, like during the scrimmage, for example, we saw Shane Ray playing on the inside. Now that wasn't a regular thing for him, but you're able to, when you really sense, okay, this is 100% going to be a pass here, to throw a speed guy inside, or, to throw, somebody in a position that, where you might be worried about them being run on. I think you can have him on the inside most of the time. I wouldn't put him on the inside necessarily on short yardage situations, but I think given that most teams are passing most of the time, I don't think he's too small to be on the inside. And we saw him line up, all the way out to, a wide 9. He lined up on the edge, line up inside at nose. You can put him anywhere. And I think that's a real weapon in the CFL. So I'm not too worried about the sort of tweener status that he may or may not have.
No, I think that's a good point. We'll see what they do with him, because he definitely does have the size to him that he wouldn't get washed out inside there.
Yeah, it's not like he's 200 pounds. He's a big man, and so he can hold his own. The next signing the Argos made was American defensive back Robert Priester, 5'9", 180, out of Wyoming. He's had a little bit of CFL experience. So he started with Winnipeg. I think he got on the field in 2 different games. One of those was a start. This is back in 2018. Signed with Edmonton for 2019, but he didn't end up making that roster. Spent some time with the Tampa Bay Vipers of the XFL. The Bombers brought him back this year to take a look, but he was just cut about a week ago. And so Toronto brought him in. And, he'll be competing for that field corner spot, battling for, I guess, for the right to be Jalen Collins' backup. But yeah, he's a player. I like him. I enjoyed watching his film. I'm not sure what happened to him in Winnipeg or in Edmonton previously, but he's really quick. I guess he's not big, and maybe that's the knock some people have on him, especially teams that are going with a Canadian field corner. But with the system here, with the Argos seemingly going ahead with 2 American corners, I think he's got a legitimate fight for that backup to Jalen Collins. Because he's quick, he's strong, and he's good against the run too. So we'll see what the Argos do with him. The other guy that was brought in this week, linebacker Jonathan Jones, 5'11", 230. Toledo most recently, but he started his career at Notre Dame. I think he played 3 seasons at Notre Dame before transferring to Toledo, and he was a huge part of that Rockets defense this past season. He's mostly a middle linebacker. He can play that will spot, and he did a little bit of that at Toledo. I don't love him at will in the CFL. To me, there's just too much ground, and to me, he's got Mac written all over him, and so. And even his build, he looks pretty much like Enoch Mwamba. So the thing that concerns me here, I like him as a player a lot. His film looks really good. He was one of the defensive leaders out there. It's basically him and the free safety who was drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals that were the real players on that defense. So I like that part of it. I worry here that he's being brought in to be the backup to Enoch Mwamba. Maybe this is going to be a position that is not going to be Canadian going forward. That has to raise your eyebrows, right?
Well, I think you put your finger on it in the article. Is with Kassar being hurt again, and he had kind of a injury plague first year. I think they're probably looking to shore up that position, and they might be pivoting away from that. Kassar's sort of brother in arms, if you will. Hoyt seems to have a stronger grasp on a spot. It's interesting because you look at this. If you look at Jones, he's a player. I think of the people he signed, or that the Argos signed, he is the one that I think has the best chance to make this opening day squad. I think that he has good measurables. I don't think he's going to be a star, but can he be a backup middle linebacker? Yeah, I think definitely. I would put him on the short list in the linebacker position.
Yeah, I don't think there's much question. I love his film, and he, like you said, he's not a flashy player. Like, he's not a guy that's going to have a ton of highlights. He's really disciplined. He does his job. He lets everyone else do their jobs. And he's a smart football player. And we've seen how much that matters to this coaching staff and to this management. They love intelligent football players, and he's another one of those guys. So, yeah, I think just right away before even really seeing him on the field, I think he's got a really good shot at making this team. And yeah, I worry about what this team's long-term plan might be at middle linebacker, because I'm pulling for Cassar. He's one of our guys, and I loved watching him playing at Carleton. I think he has what it takes to be a great CFL middle linebacker.
Totally. He just needs, like you see it sometimes. It's really unfortunate. Players starting a career and they just can't string together 6 games without an injury, and it's just, and sometimes you get buried on the depth chart. So I really hope, that he's able to come all the way back and put some valuable time in, because you just see it so often. A young player gets hurt early, and it's just the train keeps going, and sometimes you fall off onto the road.
The last signing that the Argos made this week was American Jake Night King Halava, who's a defensive end, 6'3", 251, at a Grand Valley State, previously with Northern Illinois. Night King, first of all, we got to talk about that nickname for a second. This is a fantastic nickname.
Yeah.
And where it comes from is he does if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you've seen the Night King, how he raises his arms to, is he raising the dead when he does that? I think that's what he's doing, right? Bringing zombies back to life?
That is, part of it. I don't think he has to be bringing people back. I think it's just his
He
swag.
just does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty awesome moment. Like when he does that, it's such a powerful move. Anyway, that is Jake Halava's sack celebration is the Night King's move, and so he started getting called the Night King. So in a league with a history of awesome nicknames, there've been some amazing ones. My favorite still is Gizmo Williams. I think that's and it's such an awesome. Gizmo Williams was amazing. Everyone just called him Gizmo, and you knew who it was. But
yeah, I think
Pinball Clemens on that list.
He's going to have a harder road than Jones to make the team, however.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's another guy that doesn't. There's not one thing that stands out. He doesn't have elite speed or elite size or anything like that. He's a good player. He's got some really nice moves. Again, seems intelligent. And what I mean when I say seems intelligent, when you watch a few of his games sort of strung together, the moves he uses, the techniques that he employs are different each game. And he's obviously done film study in preparation. Now, some of that, maybe that's the coaching staff, maybe that's the defensive coordinator, maybe that's the line coach, maybe it's himself. But he goes into each matchup with a different strategy, and he seems to be trying to pick on a team's weakness. And so initially when you watch him, like if you just watch his highlights, for example, you would say, well, this is a guy that just takes too many risks. He's cutting inside when he's got contained responsibility. He's completely abandoning that. But when you watch full game film on him, he's not actually doing that. He's picking his moments. He knows when the play is going away. He knows their tendency to run versus pass. He knows when he can take a chance. And that to me is what I pick up on and say, yeah, that's a smart player. That's somebody that has studied the opponent and knows exactly what he's doing. So, and the other reason I like a signing like this is you mentioned this a few weeks ago. I don't remember who it was. I think it was when we brought in that kid from Alaska. When you bring in somebody from a small school, someone from Grand Valley State, when's the last time you heard anyone talk about Grand Valley State in Michigan? When you bring in someone like that, it raises eyebrows because somebody has talked to you about that player. Somebody has talked to one of the coaches. Somebody has talked to one of the scouts or the management team about this player, because this is not the same as bringing someone in from LSU or Florida State or wherever. So somebody clearly is like, hey, you guys have to take a look at this kid. And the CFL is filled with players like that from strange schools that you would never otherwise have heard of, like Slippery Rock U, and someone has just come in and made a name for themselves. To even out rosters, the Argos had to release some players. So we saw the retirement of Arjun Colquhoun. Arjun Colquhoun retiring is upsetting for me. He's Canadian corner that we really didn't get to see too much of. I was excited about his signing last season, going into last year. Of course, he had success out in Edmonton. He was a Michigan State Spartan, regarded as one of the top players in his draft class. I think he was ranked number 4 overall by the Scouting Bureau in his draft year. And a guy that we were so excited to come in and be that starting field corner last year, he ended up getting hurt, and the Argos had to switch. They basically decided when he was injured, they decided, okay, I guess we're going to have to go American at that spot. And they had enough Canadians starting elsewhere where they could actually do that. And then when he finally came back in, he suffered that gruesome leg injury last season against Montreal, which I think anyone who watched that game, you remember just, seeing the faces of his teammates and, tears streaming down their faces as they watched him get carted off. And that was, unfortunately the last time he'd be on the field as a player, as it turns out. And so he is calling it a career. So Matt Gledhill, receiver, was also released. The Matt Gledhill release surprised me a little bit because the Argos only just picked him up. I think what was sort of interesting about this is that, remember, Gledhill was picked up pre-draft. He was at the Eastern Combine. His vertical was hugely impressive at the Eastern Combine, and that got a lot of people's attention. And because of his age and status, he didn't need to actually go through the draft because he'd already been through that process. He'd already been eligible. And so the Argos basically just after that combine are like, can we just sign this guy? They're like, yeah, okay, well, let's sign him then. Because I think if he's a draft pick, I don't think they would let him go at this point. I think they would feel sort of bound. It would make sense to hang on to him. But because they ended up taking him pre-draft, they felt okay about doing that. And I think we just saw, you and I saw that on Sunday. The Argos have so many big Canadian receivers. And when you see, we know what Tommy Nield can do. And then you see Sam Baker out there, who's basically the same kind of build as Matt Gledhill, same job that he does, same kind of player. And I guess you only need so many of those guys. And unfortunately, it was a numbers game for Matt Gledhill.
And who knows? I mean, maybe they bring him back.
Yeah, they may. I thought he looked good. I love his size, but Sam Baker was just so impressive. Sam Baker's so large now. He still moves extremely well. He's such a big guy. I think he's forgotten that he's a receiver. His legs are tree trunks. We'll get a little bit to the double blue game, but running him on jet sweeps, he's a mismatch on the outside, catching balls over the middle. He's got really nice hands. He's just such a load when he gets moving in space. So, I'm hoping he gets some time on the field this year. But yeah, when you're competing against Sam Baker and Tommy Nield, it's tough. And yeah, hopefully we do see Matt Gledhill back, and I'm hoping he gets picked up somewhere else if not back here. But yeah, he was unfortunately released this week. Cam Glenn also released, American defensive back. We didn't really get too much of a chance to see Cam Glenn, and I sort of had him penciled in backing up somewhere, one of the halfback spots. The defensive backfield is just so rich. So, when they had to make a corresponding move with one of the signings we talked about, it just made sense to release a defensive back who really wasn't in the mix for a starting spot, especially after some of the other guys that are competing for backup spots played so well at that scrimmage. And then the fourth guy who isn't leaving permanently, thank goodness, is Theron Churchill, who's taken some time to be with his partner who's expecting. This is their first child. And, he went on Twitter and explained, he didn't have to do any of this, but he just wanted to explain to Argo fans why he was stepping away and why this was so important to him. And I love this. I was so happy for him to be in a position where he's able to do this, because in his position, I would have done the exact same thing. To be there for the birth of your child, who's due, I believe, this week. If you can do it, and the Argos have been so supportive over the last few years, especially with people that have been dealing with personal situations. I guess that kind of falls under this umbrella as well. They've wished them the best. We'll be here when you get back. When you're ready, let us know, and we'll welcome you back in. And that's the case here with Theron Churchill. So I was happy to see that the team I felt really dealt with that situation extremely well and gave him the confidence that he needed to go out and do this. JB, let's talk about the double blue game. So you and I sat at a kind of windy, kind of cold Alumni Stadium in Guelph on Sunday night for the double blue game. Kind of a weird scrimmage. Coach Dinwiddie gave it his own sort of flavor. It was hard to follow at times. You had teams starting, and they weren't even really concrete teams. There was mixing and matching all over the place. And sometimes you're starting at the opposition's 22-yard line. Sometimes you're starting at your own 5. There are different situational things they had going. Limited special teams play, but it was nice to watch some Argos football again. And I think we took in a fair amount. But just before we get to that, what did you think of the setup? What did you think of the setup of the game itself and the way they ran it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what they wanted to do. If there wasn't a huge crowd, I don't think they were expecting a crowd. I don't think it was for a crowd. I think if you wanted it for a crowd, I probably would have found some way to potentially have an announcer. I think there are things you might have done if you were interested in, having this be an event. It felt more, which is fine. Like, it felt more like we were observing a practice than we were participating in a scrimmage being put on for fans. So I would, there are things I would tweak if the goal was to have it for fans.
And I don't think it was because they could have had an announcer. The PA announcer Adam was sitting with us, so he was right there. He could have gone up and announced the game, but clearly they didn't want that. And if they'd wanted this to be a huge fan event, they would have announced this well in advance. We would have known about it. It was basically announced the night before or the morning of. And it wasn't done in a huge broadcast way.
I think it was for the team. I think they were. Yeah. They were curious to see some full team reps and kind of take a look quickly at what people look like in 12s, because as you know, like a lot of times you can't tell from drills. You can't tell until you're actually out there, even in non-contact. You immediately see, oh, okay, that guy's a step slow, or that guy's got some real pop. It's amazing actually how much a scrimmage reveals.
Yeah, and having watched a practice the day before, or 2 days before, I guess it was the day before the Saturday practice, to go from Saturday practice to the Sunday night scrimmage was amazing how much difference there is, like you say, because the speed is different. Guys that didn't stand out necessarily in drills and in one-on-ones maybe, who suddenly did pop when you're looking at them in this setting. And there were a few players that really did stand out. Just before we get into individual players, I thought it was kind of interesting, little details. Like, and I think this is such a Coach Dinwiddie thing, because he is an attention to details guy. The national anthem to start the scrimmage, I thought was interesting, just to go through the procedure of it, right? You've got officials there and the teams standing on the sideline for the national anthem. It's unusual to do that in an event that's not made for fans. Like you don't have the national anthem at the beginning of practice. But I think that's just one of those things where he wanted to sort of simulate the environment as best he could before the team heads out, we think, to Ottawa this Friday for their first preseason game. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Let's talk about some of the players that stood out. Maybe we can go through this positionally. We saw all 4 quarterbacks get a fair amount of action. Mostly it was McLeod Bethel-Thompson and Antonio Pipkin. They took by far the most snaps, and they certainly attempted the most passes. I had McLeod Bethel-Thompson with 13 attempts, and Pipkin with 12 attempts. Pipkin with more dropbacks in total. Chad Kelly with only 5 passes. Austin Simmons with 5 passes as well. What did you take away from the quarterbacks?
Well, I took away that Macbeth had a large pillow strapped to his leg, so that was concerning.
I didn't like to see his knee or his calf wrapped up. He seemed to have like a sort of a sleeve on his left leg.
It seemed a bit like, Are we having him? It seemed unusual to me that somebody would be that wrapped and doing reps in practice. That seems more like, you've got one leg, but you're trying to win a playoff game. Usually, that would be a sit down. I was surprised that he was involved at all in the practice if he's got that significant a wrap on his leg. It seemed odd to me. That sort of stood out. I thought he made some great throws. He again, there's tons of arm. Made a couple of throws where he just like, that's a professional quarterback. Right on the money. I'd love to see them try and use the middle of the field a little more with him. Chad Kelly, he's got real zip on the ball too. I think that, like any rookie, the game is moving very fast for him, and he's not necessarily able to push the ball down the field as much as you would like to see. That's my thing with young quarterbacks is, the check down is it's like it's weird. Like if you're a veteran quarterback and you're checking down, that's smart. To me, if you're a young quarterback and you're checking down, it's different because I think you're checking down because you're not seeing downfield. I would love to see him try and push the ball more downfield, even if that means interceptions. I think it's better for his development to keep his eyes downfield and not quickly drop to the check down. But look, he definitely has zip on the ball. He really did stand out. So I thought that was exciting.
Did he look to you and I know it's hard for us to explain because I'm imagining he did look to you as he did to me, like the second best quarterback out there?
Yeah. I think so. I think he's clearly the backup.
Now, how do you explain that? Because I was having trouble explaining that to someone this week because he goes, we had him as going 2 for 5 for 21 yards, taking 2 sacks. So how do you look at those stats and say, yeah, he looked pretty good?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that his velocity is certainly professional ready. I liked his ability to scramble and move as often as the case with young quarterbacks. Being off schedule, he was able to make some things happen. So I like that too. I think, you put those two things together. I think that he was a little bit better than Pipkin, but not noticeably. I think Pipkin looked fine as well. Made some good throws, made some bad throws, but I think Kelly's got a more electric arm, so that's probably, and he's a new shiny toy, so there's probably some of that bias in there too.
Kelly was fun to watch, and there were a couple of throws he made. One that I thought the refs just blew dead way too early. They were trying to, I don't blame the refs because if they had blown it too late, the coaches would have been screaming at them for the next month. You don't want to risk quarterbacks getting even touched in a scrimmage. But yeah, this play, there was someone closing in on him. I don't remember which of the registered sacks it was, but Kelly had time and he just launched one about 25 yards downfield, connected, beautiful catch, and yet it didn't count because the refs had blown it dead a split second before he released that ball. And in a real game, he would have had time to release it cleanly, just like he did, and he would have been hit right after he threw. But but that's that's the job. That's what quarterback is, and it was unfortunate. But a play like that, you look at that and you say, yeah, that was a professional play. He bought himself a little bit of time and found an open receiver, fired it in there, and he would have taken that hit. But yeah, that to me is plays like that. And then there was another one pretty close to the end zone where he just found a way to get the ball out of there. He didn't step into it, and that's something that he'll have to learn, and especially with the bigger field that he's not used to. Because I think that he sees a guy sort of in the corner of the end zone, he does the wrist flick to quickly get it out there, not realizing it's an extra 10 yards away than it usually would be on the American field he's used to. But just the play that the sort of awareness, I guess, that he had there. is what impresses me. So, yeah, I loved his presence. And again, not to knock Antonio Pipkin, I thought the scrimmage just isn't set up for his skill set. There were many occasions where in a game he would have scrambled, he would have found yards, but that's not what you want to do in a setup like this. Like, no one wants the quarterback to be, running on broken plays in a scrimmage. That doesn't help you evaluate anybody else.
No,
so he took 4 sacks, but that's not a realistic number.
Yeah, I thought he looked fine too. I didn't, but Kelly's arm is clearly electric. I think you're watching it, and any football fan can, you just see electric. It's like watching a guy that throws 98. You're like, okay, maybe this is something, maybe it's not, but you have my attention.
Is he the guy you're most interested in seeing Friday night?
That is a good question.
Because for me, it is. There's about 10 guys I really want to see, but for me, he's number 1. I want to see what he looks like in a live game.
Not really, just because I don't think, I think he, the likelihood of Friday being good is so low for him. I just don't think he'll have had I don't know how great a look we're going to get, for him on Friday. I'm more interested in the wide receivers, truthfully.
Yeah, and I can't knock you for that. They are because we'll talk about that a bit more when we get into previewing that Ottawa matchup. But yeah, there's so many good receivers fighting for backup spots. Let's jump ahead to that. I'm gonna bypass running back because we couldn't see. It was basically one hand touch, and so poor AJ Ouellette with his 5 carries for 7 yards because he's running right up the middle, and the referees just blow it dead as soon as he gets the handoff because someone comes near him. So you didn't really get a good sense of that. I was hoping we might be able to see a little bit more Andrew Harris, but rather correctly, they gave him 1 carry and called that a day. So we can't really talk too much about running backs. But yeah, let's talk about those receivers. This is a huge battle for those backup spots. We know right now, just based on what we saw them trot out there, it looked like we're going with Devaris Daniels, Eric Rogers to the boundary. It's looking like Markeith Ambles to the inside, Banks in the middle of that trips to the field, and Curly Gittens Jr. at Z. And then there's a bunch of guys in the backup roles. And I know Jawan Breskison's a bit banged up right now. He sat out of the scrimmage. And so, he's obviously in the picture for those starting spots as well. But after that, it is a mess of really talented receivers. Who did you like?
Even though I have said I'm interested in seeing them on Friday night, I didn't feel anybody really popped. As is always the case, or almost always the case, the defense is far ahead of the offense in terms of install and the speed at which they're able to react to things, where the offense needs so much more timing and so many more reps. So the offense just had a really hard time all evening, which is not unusual, especially against a very good defense. So I didn't feel like any wide receiver really pop for me, but I think that will be different against Ottawa. I think that it's a little easier to play a team that doesn't know all your plays cold. Where Toronto, the defense knows what little Toronto has put in. They go up against it. So they were basically like a team that did fantastic film study. They were running the routes for them. They were all over everything the offense was doing.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I liked Isaiah Wright, AJ Richardson as well. Those two really stood out for me. Isaiah Wright, I've got my eye on because of the special teams addition that he could really be. He's a fantastic punt and kick returner, but see him run routes.
Did he catch that? Did he catch that out
for the touchdown?
Yeah.
No, that was Jamari Hester that caught the touchdown.
Gorgeous.
Oh, he was beautiful. I know. And everyone was talking about Jamari Hester after the game. He ended up with 2 catches, I think 34 yards. I've got him down for on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that 22-yard out, it was just such a perfect throw from McLeod Bethel-Thompson. And Hester's a tough guy to cover because he's 6'6", but the Argos have so many of those big guys. Like their strategy seems to be, and I don't know if this is a Coach Dinwiddie thing or a Vince Magri thing, they have so many giant receivers. Every single one of them is like 6'2" and up. and trying to stay with Jamari Hester, who's a size mismatch, when he can move like that and get to the out like that. Because when McLeod let go of that ball, I didn't think there was any way Hester was going to get there. He not only got there, he was able to sort of toe tap as he was going out of bounds. It was a beautiful play. But yeah, I was more impressed with Isaiah Wright and AJ Richardson just for what they were able to do in space, and just finding open areas of the field, because you often see it's different. Receivers in the US versus Canada, it's very different. The focus on route running in the States is very different from how it is in Canada, because there's so much more space here. Route running, it's all about precision and the sort of exact nature of it in the States, because you're dealing with such small spaces. In the CFL, it's about an instinct, especially in zone coverage, an instinct for finding open spaces far more than it is the route running. And that's something that Isaiah Wright and AJ Richardson seemed to grasp immediately. And while they weren't always hit, I think they each had 4 catches, but they were open a lot. They were really good at finding space, especially those short routes, and their mismatches too. So I like those guys a lot. I thought Ernest Edwards had a couple really nice plays, great jumping catch that he made. So I'm excited about his addition. I already talked a bit about Sam Baker and just how gigantic he is out there. I want his updated weight because he looks like a fullback. And I know that's sort of what he was trying to be last year before deciding to go back to school for another year. But man, that is a large receiver I'm excited about. So
I'm excited to see the return game too. Obviously, we didn't get much of a look at that. So
yeah, and it's tough to tell. And a couple of those guys went back for returns. Javon Leake, the running back, was back there, and we already talked about Isaiah Wright being a potential guy in the return game too. So that we will get to see in Ottawa, and I'm excited about punt returns and kick returns. O-line, they technically gave up a lot of sacks, but I'm not really worried about that because they weren't real sacks to me. Only 2 of them were, maybe 3 were real sacks, and those weren't really on that first unit. I thought, considering Peter Nicastro is still out, and I guess we're expecting him to be out probably a few games into the season at this point. I thought Lawrence held up fairly well at center, and the rest of the line I thought looked really good. You've got Darius Bladek at right guard, Philip Blake left guard, Isaiah Cage is playing left tackle. It's great to see him back, and then Dejan Allen was so instrumental last year in playing left tackle, because when Cage went down last year, we didn't know where they were going to go. Allen has a great year at left tackle. They move him over to the right, and some guys can just do it very seamlessly. Some guys can't, and he seems to be one of those guys with no problems at all. He's played almost his entire career. When he was at Hawaii, he was a left guard, left tackle. I think he had a little bit of center play, but never on the right side. And there he is playing right tackle, and yeah, it looked fantastic. So I'm not worried about the starting group. I have concerns about depth on the O-line because we saw a big difference when those other guys came in. We watched Gregor McKellar a little bit, the first round draft pick for the Argos. I thought he looked like he belonged. He had, I guess, one rookie moment when Shane Ray sort of took him to school on a speed move, which you just don't see a lot from the guard position. But I thought he held up all right. You thought McKellar looked decent, right?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty. It was a pretty cheap move. It's pretty unusual to bring Ray in on the inside like that. That to me seemed a little offside. I'm like, come on, in a scrimmage, you're gonna bring Ray inside just to speed step the kid. So my eyebrow was raised at that a little bit because unless I see Ray inside once during the regular season, we'll see about that. Yeah, I thought he looked good. He didn't look out of place. Thought he anchored well. They're you don't really get a sense of O-lineman until you start seeing a lot more twists. But I thought for a straight bull rush, he held his own, and they were certainly keen to have him, if not roll with the ones, at least 2s and some 1 stuff. So I thought it looked good. I think you can tell a lot, and he didn't seem to be lost out there. So that was encouraging.
The defense looked outstanding. I don't know if we need to break it down position by position because, again, we didn't see the defensive starters were out there probably a little bit more than the offensive starters were. Especially like the offensive receivers, the starters were barely out there at all. The coaches really wanted to see this sort of second and third tier of the guys that they've got out there. That starting defensive unit is really good. And then there are a couple of guys that really stood out who are going to be competing for backup spots. Like in the defensive backfield, for example, Maurice Carnell IV was outstanding. He had a couple picks. He broke up that touchdown actually. That I guess would have been the second touchdown. No, that would have been the first touchdown for Hester. He made up for it later by actually catching that gorgeous touchdown pass from McLeod Bethel Thompson. But yeah, Carnell IV, he was a guy that was playing with Hamilton a season ago and couldn't get off the practice roster. They had moved him from corner to halfback, and he was basically just a practice roster guy. He came in here and he made a real case for himself as a player that's going to dress week to week. You can't have a much better game as a DB. No,
he looked terrific. Again, I mean, it's nice to see. It's nice to see. I love defense, and I loved their adrenaline, and I loved how they got after the offense and essentially bullied the offense off the field. So I love that. I mean, nothing warms a defensive coach's heart more than the offense being bullied off the field. So I enjoyed that very much. I thought that they know they're good, they know they're fast, and they went out there and dominated. I don't hold that against the offense. It's the defense that we saw sometimes last year, but that we both feel like this year could be dominant, and that's how they looked. They looked deep in the secondary. They looked like they had a nice rotation at the line going. It's really just a question of linebacker holding up, because I thought that that could really be the identity of this team, which would be fantastic, truthfully.
What do you think about them having Chris Edwards out there with the starters at Sam? Because we expect him to be, he's got a 6-game suspension to start the season. We don't know exactly how that appeal process is going to work, but it's, he's going to start the season suspended. So do you put him out there for these reps, or do you start working now? What your plan's going to be?
Yeah, that's a tricky it's a tricky balance for sure. I think you're probably, you can't have him not be involved in camp, right? I think you want him to feel like part of the team. I think you want him to have, a sense of the install. As you get closer, you're probably going to have to dial him back into twos. But it made sense to me to have him in the identity formation part of the year, to have him out there, because I think he's going to be a crucial aspect of this defense's identity. He's, I've seen him look like a star, and so that makes sense to me. I think you want him out there to take a leadership role, and then, as your install gets a little better, you're going to need to phase in the starter for the first 6.
I expect Robertson Daniel to start the season at Sam. And for me, the Chris Edwards playing with the starters makes sense, because Robertson Daniel is starting there while the Argos wait for Shaq to return from injury. And so when Shaq's ready to go, which we expect will be soon, I would imagine he'll play that boundary halfback spot, and then Robertson Daniel will shift to the Sam, and that's probably, to me, how they'll begin the season. So I figure since Robertson Daniel's on the field anyway, he's getting halfback reps, which aren't that dissimilar to the Sam backer in the CFL. Then I don't really think there is much harm in having Chris Edwards there. You may as well get him the reps. You're going to be counting on him, especially since this is a new or a slightly different defensive system than what we've seen with Coach Mace installing his stuff this year. So I think the move makes sense. At first I wasn't sure, and I was like, I don't know if I'd have him out there or not. But yeah, I think the more we talk it through, the more it makes sense to me. JB, let's end this segment with special teams. I love that John Haggerty can punt that football like out of the stratosphere.
Yeah,
Do they go? Is this the plan? Because I think it is. I think he's going to be punting and Beatty's going to be kicking field goals. Is that how it's going to be?
Well, I think potentially, that'll be a question of, how, I think the issue will be, is he that much better than what you're getting with just the one guy? And that's not an easy thing to accomplish. Like you're like, okay, he's better, but is he better every time? And how much better is he? Because at the end of the day, if you're 5 yards better, is that worth a position when Beatty can do it, fine, right? So I think that's really the question: is what is the gap um, between those two? So I don't think that's a lock. I think he's going to have to really, either he is fantastic at coffin corner, or his hang time is really like half a second better. It's gonna have to be. I think it's gonna have to be something pretty measurable. It makes sense to bring him in, but I think the value added is gonna have to be serious to give up the perk of having one player hold that position.
I think his values increase because of the rule changes. You have to be so accurate as a punter now, because if you punt directly out of bounds and it's not inside the 15, that's suddenly a penalty. We know no yards is a penalty, so you want consistency. If you've got an inconsistent punter, it's so difficult on that coverage team not to get a no yards penalty, because you're expecting to run to a certain depth. If it's 10 yards short on this one punt, you're going to get called, and that's 15 yards now, even if it's bouncing. So I think his values increase because he is consistent. He is able to really hang it up there. Beatty's a good punter. And, we saw last year, his field goals are, the best in the league. His kickoffs, the best in the league. His punting was good. So you can get away with it. But I do think he's going to be out there. And if he is, we saw one of Boris Beatty's field goal attempts where John Haggerty was the holder. And I've been on that for a long time now. Stop sending McLeod Bethel Thompson out there to hold the field goals. I get that he was the guy last year because he was the backup quarterback starting the season. The plan was Nick Arbuckle, so it made sense to me that McLeod Bethel Thompson was the holder. And they didn't want to disrupt it mid-season because Beatty was setting records. So you don't want to just suddenly go and change his holder. It doesn't work like that. But man, they've got to find another solution. And it drives me up the wall that McLeod Bethel Thompson was still holding for Beatty for, I think, all but one kick at that scrimmage. Haggerty should either be out there every time, or someone else who is going to be on the team. Send him out there to hold. Ideally, it's the punter. Like, that's the most ideal situation, is the punter holds for the kicker, because those two guys can work on that all practice long, whereas you can't do that necessarily with somebody else. So I'm hoping Haggerty's the punter, Beatty's the kicker, and Haggerty is also the holder. That would be a huge win for me. All right, JB, let's get to the CBA update. We'll make this quick. This will sort of be a brief one, but the big deal for me is that the union seems sort of divided at this point, because you know a lot about contract negotiations and union bargaining and everything else. It's pretty unusual for the bargaining team to approve a deal, to send it back to their membership and have it voted down, isn't it?
Very unusual. Usually, the negotiators are usually have a much higher threshold than the membership, right? Like, that's the nature of it. And that's why you want good negotiators, because they're looking for more than what the membership as a whole will settle for. So, usually when they send something back, from being involved in the negotiations, like, when your negotiators send you something back, that's basically them saying, it is our belief that there is no better deal to be had. Not like, oh, there might be a better deal. It's like, this is as good as it's going to get. And usually you kind of have to hold your nose and take it and move on. They clearly had a breakdown in the temperature of the rooms. I don't know whether that was because teams haven't really been in camp, and maybe team reps couldn't really get a sense of what was happening, or maybe they weren't having group meetings to kind of get a sense of this divided locker room. It's pretty surprising, and I think largely because lots of people didn't vote, and probably all the Canadian players did vote because they were really upset about something, and the other, members of the CFL did not, and that's one of the reasons why it didn't pass.
Yeah, I gather the Canadian players seem most upset about the ratio issues and the idea that you could have three naturalized Canadians, Americans who had been playing the CFL for a period of time, come in for a percentage of snaps. And I guess to Canadian players, this seemed like too much of a concession, as opposed to what had previously been proposed, where you're talking about 6 Canadians and then the seventh could be a naturalized Canadian. So that could be the issue. And maybe it's not that the bargaining team misjudged the temperature of the room, as you said. Maybe it's just that they had counted on 100% of the vote, and maybe if they'd had 100% of the membership voting, maybe it would have passed. So that's, we don't know. We're just speculating about this. But yeah, now we're in a situation where a proposal has gone back to the players now from the league with some changes that were made. It was John Hodge from 3 Down that broke that, I believe, last night. And the players have until Thursday night, basically, to decide whether or not they're going to go ahead with this. And for the Argos, it's weird because they've got a game on Friday. So you'd like to be in Ottawa by the time you're going to find out whether or not this deal is going to go through. I hate the timeline of this. And as a coach, I would be pulling my hair out trying to deal with this, where you don't even know for sure that there's going to be a game. And yet you're trying to game plan, not just game plan, you're trying to game plan with a roster of 104 players, trying to sort out who's getting playing time when, coming up with schedules, and who's hurt, who's not, who do we really need to see, communicating with all your positional coaches. This is a nightmare scenario for Coach Dinwiddie to go on top of everything else.
But I think, in all honesty, I think this will be fine. I think that hopefully nobody overplays their hand. I think the Canadian players stood up because they felt like what had been sent back wasn't great. That's not great for the Players Association. I don't know who's on the negotiating table or how many Canadians are on the negotiating table or what have you. But they certainly seem to underestimate how that would be received. That basically you're kind of taking a chunk out of this ratio and you're not really giving us much. So obviously that wasn't going to be well received. I can't imagine how the negotiating table thought, touching that rail was not going to be a problem without having something quite rich to offer. So that surprised me that they thought that wouldn't elicit a really strong unified response from the Canadian perspective. So I hope it gets done Thursday because, I think we don't want the PA split in half, and I don't think we want teams split in half with American guys angry at the Canadian guys who are angry at the American guys. So hopefully they took a step back. They gave the Canadians a little bit of ground, and hopefully we can, not overplay the hand. Let's just move on and accept that there was a bit of give, but nothing too destructive.
Let's assume the preseason game in Ottawa takes place. So we've now arrived at Friday night. Toronto's at Ottawa for this preseason game. We've kind of got a sense from talking to Coach Dinwiddie that we're not going to see a lot of veterans in this game. There are some new veteran players. Do you think they should be out there, or are you completely fine with fielding a team of entirely seconds, thirds, etc.?
Well, I think that I'd like to see the ones through the first half. I think that's fair. I think that's legitimate. I don't, like in terms of injuries, I don't know. Can you really hide from injuries? You could not play the preseason. The first play of the game hurt something in the regular season. So, yeah, I hope ones and twos play a lot, just because if there are guys on the bubble, you can't get a look when threes and fours are playing. either the quarterback is not giving you the ball, or if you're throwing the ball, you're not getting the receiver. The line is not holding up. Everything kind of goes south. And you can't get any evaluation because you're also playing against 3s and 4s. So it's a bit of a misnomer, I think, in terms of the evaluation. Is the only time anybody's being evaluated is when they're playing against 1s and 2s. Nothing that happens after that is worth watching. You just turn off your TV or read a book, go for a walk.
I don't expect to see McLeod Bethel Thompson out there more than a series, if at all, especially if he's not 100%. And, it's hard to say at this point how he's feeling. But
no way. He was wearing a pillow on his leg.
I know, but you're saying send your 1s out there. He's a 1.
Well, everybody else but him.
Okay. But then do you send your whole offensive line out there too?
Yeah, for the first half, 100%.
I don't think I do. I think anybody that I know is going to be a starter, I don't put in this game. I think you put all of your 2s and they play a half, and then you start trickling in other players through the third and fourth quarter, because you've got another preseason game, the game in Guelph against Hamilton. There, I would maybe, because remember, we've got roster cuts that are coming essentially right after this game against Ottawa. And so those are the decisions you have to make. So spend this whole game. That's what this is for. It's on the road too. It's ideal. So put all the guys that you're not sure about in as much playing time as you possibly can. Watch that film really carefully, go over and over and over it. Then you make your cuts. Now the team's trimmed down, and now let's take a look at, okay, these are the guys we do have. Now let's look at the starters. Now let's look at the seconds. And that can be the second preseason game. So, yeah, I don't care if we don't see a single snap from any starter on Friday. That's fine with me, as long as they can still evaluate what they do have out there. Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Make sure you tune in after the game Friday night. We will give you it all following the game. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.